Again, as with last chapter, massive trigger warning for child abuse, homophobia, transphobia, trauma, and the like. Hello, thieves, assassins, and rogues of ambiguous gender. Welcome back to another chapter of Hogwarts Bouquet, a trans Harry Potter fanfic on AO3 by ElizabethEmerald. Today's chapter is Chapter 11, titled Potions Master and Greenhouse Keeper. Summer was the best season for Severus Snape. In the potion dungeons at Hogwarts, he didn't have to deal with the oppressive heat, and he certainly didn't have to deal with any moronic children. Truly, he despised teaching. He hated the students, hated trying to dumb down the complex art of potion-making for his students, and hated having to deal with the inter-house drama that inevitably arose each year. At least in summer, he could brew to his heart's content. More than most fields of magical study, potion-making required constant work. Any spare moment he spent happily brewing the dozens of potions used to maintain a school of this size. He brewed healing potions of every type and variety, from Pepper-Up to Skele-Grow, plus the growth potions that Pomona used in the greenhouses and Hagrid used for less legal experiments. He also had his own personal stock of potions. He enjoyed brewing complex potions like Veritaserum or Felix Felicis for his practice and to keep his skills sharp, and there was always experimentation to be done. He had personally developed several new methods for brewing that could yield better results for a variety of potions. Of course, during the school year, so much of his time was spent teaching and trying to keep the members of his house from trying to kill each other that he couldn't develop his skills. Severus growled softly to himself as he worked on brewing another potion. Madame Pomfrey had ordered another batch of nutrient potions, these ones designed to be more potent. Normally, he would be thrilled for the challenge. Nutrient potions were finicky. If you weren't precise, you could create an effective poison as the balance of vitamins was thrown off in the subject's body. And these more potent ones seemed to be for someone who had spent years without the proper dietary nutrition. Their system would likely be even more sensitive to changes then. However, Severus just couldn't bring himself to feel his usual passion for his art. Summer was ending, then bringing with it the usual collection of dunces, and on top of that, Severus carefully kept his thoughts off the article from the Daily Prophet. Harry Potter had disappeared. Dumbledore was already putting pressure on Severus to infiltrate his old Death Eater haunts to see if any of Voldemort's followers had located the boy. The last thing he wanted to do was spend more time thinking about James Potter's spawn. A knock at the door to the potion room brought his head up. He shook himself from his thoughts and said his occlumency words, a habit of his long years dealing with Albus Dumbledore.
And,
he called, waving a hand towards the door in a bit of wandless magic. "Hello, Professor Snape," called a young voice from the door. "Ah, Rose Pomfrey." Madame Pomfrey had mentioned that her niece would be helping her run the errands she needed throughout the castle. Severus carefully set the ingredients he had been working on aside. He did raise his nose at the dog. A dog in a room full of volatile potions was a recipe for disaster, even disregarding his personal feelings about them. Rose had a basket on one arm and a list in that hand, and her other hand was tangled in the dog's fur. Pomfrey had said something about the girl having anxiety? Regardless, Severus focused on pulling the potions he had prepared from his stock. Rose handed him the list, then set her basket on a counter that was almost taller than she was. Severus was glad that apparently her anxiety had made it so she didn't want to talk. He hated small talk and tried to avoid it whenever he could. He silently handed her vials and bottles of potions, and she carefully placed each one in the wire rack in the basket. Nutrient potion, bruise balm, Skele-Grow, Rose whispered quietly to herself. He was interested to note that she was reciting the potions he was handing her, apparently recognizing them on sight alone. He was impressed, though he kept the emotion from his face. Most first-year students, even those who had been raised in magical houses, could recognize only a few of the most common potions, and she wasn't even of age to attend Hogwarts herself yet. Severus handed the list back to her, along with a tightly rolled scroll. Aunt Poppy wanted me to ask you how the advanced nutrient potion was coming along, Rose said, looking at the scroll that was now sitting in the slot in the wire rack. Severus gestured to the ingredients he had carefully arranged around his own cauldron.
The first batch should be ready by the end of the day,
he drawled.
It's a tricky brew, but I believe it will have the intended effect.
Hopefully it doesn't have as bad a texture as the regular nutrient potion, Rose said. She kept her eyes on the potion ingredients, not meeting Severus's eyes. The potion is way too lumpy. Severus noted without commenting several things in rapid order. Rose Pomfrey was quite small for a 10-year-old. She had personal experience with not just nutrient potions, but the other remedies he had prepared for her aunt, including apparently Skelegro. Madame Pomfrey hadn't requested the specialized nutrient potion until after she had returned to Hogwarts after her family emergency. Several of the potions in that basket were ones that were rarely used when school wasn't in session, yet she had needed far more than usually needed for the start of term. With this, he rapidly connected several dots in his mind.
Make sure Madame Pomfrey gets that scroll as well. I altered the recipe and some of the ingredients for the burn heal potion, and a few others,
Severus said. He kept his observations to himself, though he filed them away to consider later. Rose looked at the scroll in question closely. Why is it important for her to know the recipe? Those aren't the ones she brews herself, Rose asked. Severus raised his eyebrow at her, deciding whether or not he wanted to answer or foist her questions off on her aunt. Posy, Rose's black dog, watched him closely as he considered. Finally, he mentally shrugged.
As a healer, she needs to know if any of the ingredients have reactions with another potion, or if a student falls ill after taking a potion, she can track down why and mitigate any harm.
Rose smiled and looked up at him, meeting his eyes for the first time. Ah, that makes sense. People might have allergies or a combination of potions might have strange effects. Interesting. I'll review the new recipe with her when I bring her the potions. She carefully packed away her basket full of potions, keeping both hands on the basket handle this time so she wouldn't drop her charge. Aunt Poppy said I could go to the greenhouses to get some herbs she needs for her work later. Is there anything you need from there that I can help you with? Rose asked. Severus considered her offer for a moment, and Rose seemed content to allow the silence to stretch. He appreciated someone who didn't feel the need to fill every moment with needless chatter. Finally, he strode away from her, pulling a spare piece of parchment and quill from his desk. He wrote up a short list of non-dangerous ingredients. He kept both his own personal stores and the student stores of potion ingredients well stocked. However, Rose seemed to have quite the analytical mind. She might benefit from assisting with the easiest ingredients.
Professor Sprout can help you find these. Show them to Madame Pomfrey before bringing them to me. Your aunt will know whether what you've gathered will be suitable for my brewing,
Severus said as he handed her the list. Thank you, Professor, Rose said, taking the list and folding it up to bring it back to the hospital wing. She turned and took a few steps back toward the door of the potion dungeon when she suddenly stopped and turned back to face him. Aunt Minnie told me you were an accomplished occlumen?
Did she now?
Severus couldn't help but snarl. Minerva should know better than to go spouting off things like that to children. If word got out, it could jeopardize his work as a spy. He was surprised when his snarl was matched by a growl by the girl's familiar. Yes, she did. Do you think you could teach me occlumency? Rose asked. There was an unmistakable tremor to her voice. Anxiety caused by an adult showing anger, but also desperation. Severus didn't need legitimacy to be able to read the emotions on the girl's face. Why would a 10-year-old girl have such a desperate need to learn to shield her mind?
I will discuss this further with your aunt,
Severus said, turning away, though he could still see her from the corner of his eye. She smiled in relief before fleeing the dungeon. Interesting. The entire interaction had been very interesting. He would indeed have a longer conversation with both Pomfrey and McGonagall. There was quite a bit of that brief interaction that he would like clarified. Possibly because he had been thinking about her before the interruption, Rose Pomfrey reminded Severus of a young Lily Evans. He dismissed the thought from his head, returning his focus to the potion he was working with. Apparently, the regular nutrient potion is lumpy. He glanced over the established recipe that he had heavily modified for the usual potion. And of course it was lumpy. The potion had raw chunks in it when it was brewed. It would go down much smoother if some of the chunks were pureed prior to brewing, and it shouldn't affect the strength of the potion any. He made a small note on the side of the potion sheet, already covered in his notations. With that note made, he set to work on the potion. Pomona Sprout sat up and wiped sweat from her brow, leaving behind a line of dirt as she heard a knock at the door of the greenhouse. Poppy's niece stuck her head through the cracked door, shortly followed by Posy's head down near her knee. Pomona immediately smiled and waved the girl into the greenhouse. "Hello, my dear. How has your day been so far?" "Hello, Professor Sprout," Rose said. Her voice was soft, though there was a small smile on her face. Sprout noticed Rose was looking at either her ear or her shoulder while she spoke. "My day has been good. I talked to Professor Snape and picked up Aunt Poppy's potions." "Severus wasn't rude to you, was he?" Sprout asked, her voice sharp. "No, he just didn't seem like he wanted to talk much." "Yes, he does have that attitude about him, doesn't he? Don't worry, he's not always the best with, children." Or people, Sprout thought privately, though there was no reason to set Rose against one of her future teachers. She would likely form her own opinion of the staff soon enough. "Now come here and have a seat," Pomona said before patting a stool near her. Rose came over and had to clamber up the stool, being a little too short even for chairs built for the first years. Posy came and sat down too, sitting in between Rose and Pomona. "Normally, you'd be getting your safety lecture on your first day of herbology in your first year. However, since you are going to be living in the castle, and since you do have such a green thumb, I'll give you 2 now, okay?" Rose nodded, and Pomona settled back into a lecture mode. "This greenhouse is the first-year greenhouse. There's nothing dangerous here. The most you can get is a mild rash. You're welcome to come by here any time. Just make sure to wear gloves if you're handling anything you're not familiar with. And keep this little miss out of the grow beds." Pomona said the last to Posy. She wasn't too worried. Poppy had said that Posy was a trained service dog, and Rose was familiar besides that. Posy was likely smart enough and well-trained enough not to go sniffing around where she shouldn't, especially if doing so would put her mistress in danger. Rose nodded, paying close attention to every word. "The upper-level greenhouses have more dangerous plants. If you have a pressing need to go into any of those, come ask me first and I can walk you through. If the door of a greenhouse is spelled closed, you are not to open for any reason. Are we clear?" She nodded again, her eyes wide. She buried her fingers in Posy's fur, but she didn't start to shake or hyperventilate. Pomona nodded as well. She didn't want to scare her any more than she wanted to scare any of her firsties. However, a healthy level of respect for the plants never led someone astray, especially since the man-eating roses were currently teething. "Now, with the serious conversation aside, what are you interested in? If you just want to help out with the weeding and the watering, I'll be more than happy with the help. As usual, I start the first years out with. However, if you would like a plot for your own plants, I can reserve one for you." "I'd like my own plot, please," Rose said, a wide smile on her face. "Aunt Minnie also got me a small grow bed in my room in the hospital wing. I'd like to put some plants in there, too." "Fantastic! Now, what kind of plants do you want to grow?" Rose looked a little unsure, but Pomona merely smiled. "How about this? I'll show you around the greenhouse, and I'll tell you about some of the things we're growing here. Some of the plants are just pretty, some are tasty, and the house elves use them in the cooking. Some are good for potions or magical remedies. How does that sound?" Rose nodded enthusiastically, and Posy's tail wagged to match. Pomona stood, inviting her to hop off her stool as she began her tour of the greenhouse. Thank you for listening to this chapter. Have a wonderful day. and thanks for watching.